There is something strange about reality. Two people can live in the same world, walk the same streets, face the same opportunities, and yet their lives unfold in completely different ways. One person seems to constantly encounter doors opening. The other feels like every path leads to another wall. For most of us, the explanation seems obvious. We say things like, some people are lucky, some people are connected, some people were born in the right place. But what if reality works differently than we think? What if the difference between those lives is not external at all? What if the real difference exists inside the observer? Because there is an idea hidden inside quantum physics that most people never consider. Reality is not simply something that happens to you. Reality is something you participate in. At the quantum level, particles do not behave like solid objects. They behave like possibilities. Only when observed does a possibility collapse into a specific outcome. In other words, observation influences reality. Now imagine applying that idea to your life, not in a mystical way, but in a psychological one. Because every moment of your life is interpreted through a filter you rarely notice, a filter called identity. Identity is not simply the name you give yourself, it is the internal definition of who you believe you are. And that definition quietly shapes everything, what you notice, what you ignore, what feels possible, what feels impossible. Most people believe they see reality clearly, but in truth, they see reality through the identity they carry. Someone who sees themselves as capable notices opportunities. Someone who sees themselves as limited notices obstacles. Someone who believes growth is natural moves toward expansion. Someone who believes struggle is inevitable moves toward resistance. The external world may look the same, but the internal interpretation is completely different. And interpretation shapes action. Action shapes results. Results reinforce identity, which means something fascinating begins to happen. Reality becomes a mirror, not a mirror of your wishes, but a mirror of your identity. This is why two people can stand in the same situation and experience two entirely different lives, because the reality they perceive is filtered through who they believe they are. Once identity begins shaping perception, something else begins to form. A loop. A loop so subtle that most people live inside it for decades without realizing it. It begins with a simple thought, a quiet internal belief. Something like, I am not good with money, or people like me don't succeed in things like that. At first it feels harmless, just a thought. But that thought begins influencing perception. When opportunities appear, the mind hesitates. When growth appears, doubt emerges. When risk appears, fear becomes louder. And those reactions lead to decisions. Small decisions, often invisible decisions. Decisions like postponing an opportunity, avoiding a conversation, declining a possibility, staying in a familiar environment. Each decision feels reasonable, logical, safe, but every one of those decisions shapes reality. Over time, the person begins experiencing results that seem to confirm the original belief. The opportunity disappears, the growth never happens, the change never arrives. And the mind quietly says, "See, I knew it." But what actually happened was something much deeper. The identity created the perception. The perception shaped the decisions. The decisions shaped the outcome, and the outcome reinforced the identity. A closed loop, an invisible cycle. Thought, perception, action, reality, identity again. Most people try to break this cycle by changing the outside world. They try to force new results. They push harder, work longer, search for better strategies. But the loop remains active. Because the root of the loop is not external. The root is identity, And identity does not change simply because we want it to. Identity changes when perception shifts, when awareness interrupts the pattern, when the observer begins to see themselves differently. And the moment that awareness appears, the loop becomes visible. What once felt like fate begins to look like pattern. What once felt like bad luck begins to reveal structure. And the person begins to realize something profound. Reality may not be fixed. It may be responding to the identity that continues to observe it. Until that happens, reality continues reflecting the same internal structure. Not because the universe is punishing anyone, but because coherence always expresses itself. Reality reflects the identity that observes it. But here is where something remarkable begins to appear. If identity shapes perception, and perception shapes reality, then changing identity changes everything. This is the moment most people misunderstand. They imagine identity as something fixed, something permanent, something that defines them forever. But identity is not fixed. It is constructed, it is built from memories, experiences, stories, interpretations. And what has been constructed can be reconstructed. The moment you begin observing your identity, a shift becomes possible. You begin noticing the quiet voice that interprets events. You begin noticing the assumptions hidden inside your reactions. You begin noticing the beliefs that silently guide your choices. For the first time, identity becomes visible. And when something becomes visible, it can be changed. This is where awareness becomes powerful, because awareness creates distance between you and the pattern. Instead of automatically reacting, you begin observing. Instead of immediately believing every thought, you begin questioning it. Instead of reinforcing the same identity, you begin experimenting with a new one. Imagine someone who has always believed they are not capable of success. That belief shapes years of hesitation, years of cautious decisions, years of staying small. But the moment that person begins questioning the belief, something changes. They begin asking new questions. What if that belief was never true? What if it was simply inherited? What if the identity they have been living from is outdated? This moment of questioning creates space. And inside that space, new choices become possible. New actions appear. New behaviors begin forming. And slowly, something fascinating begins to happen. Reality starts responding differently, not because the world changed overnight, but because perception shifted. Opportunities that were invisible become visible. Conversations that once felt intimidating become natural. Decisions that once felt impossible become normal. And confidence begins to grow in subtle ways. This is not magic. It is alignment. When identity changes, perception changes. When perception changes, behavior changes. And when behavior changes, reality reorganizes. So the question is no longer whether reality reflects identity. The real question becomes this: what identity are you living from? Because every day, in small and quiet ways, you are reinforcing an answer. In the way you interpret challenges, in the way you speak about yourself, in the way you respond to opportunities, in the way you imagine your future. Each of these moments strengthens a version of you. And that version of you becomes the observer shaping reality. This is why transformation rarely happens overnight, not because change is impossible, but because identity is reinforced through repetition. The thoughts you repeat become beliefs. The beliefs you repeat become perception. The perception you repeat becomes behavior. And behavior repeated long enough becomes identity. But the same process that builds an identity can also transform it. Small shifts repeated consistently begin forming a new internal reference. Instead of seeing obstacles first, you begin looking for possibilities. Instead of assuming limitation, you begin assuming growth. Instead of protecting a small version of yourself, you begin expanding into a larger one. At first, the change feels subtle, almost invisible. But over time, something powerful emerges. Your reactions begin to change. Your decisions begin to change. Your environment begins to change, and eventually, your reality begins to change. Not because the universe suddenly decided to reward you, but because your identity aligned with a different set of possibilities. Reality did not transform randomly. It reflected the observer that you became, and perhaps that is the most important realization of all. Your life is not simply something that happens to you. It is something shaped by the identity through which you observe it, which means the most powerful transformation available to you is not changing the world, it is changing the observer. Because when the observer changes, reality follows. And when enough of those small shifts accumulate, a completely different life begins to emerge. Not suddenly, but inevitably. Because reality always reflects the identity that observes it.